The afternoon sun stood high in the sky, burning the cracked pavement and bleaching the colors from everything it touched, when a single moment of cruelty changed many lives forever. What began as a quiet plea from a desperate mother outside a roadside restaurant turned into an act of violence no one expected, and a reckoning no one could stop. In broad daylight, with people passing by and traffic humming nearby, humanity was tested, broken, and then unexpectedly restored by thunderous engines and unlikely guardians. If you believe that kindness still matters in this world, that second chances exist, and that compassion can rise even in the ugliest moments, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. The woman's name was Maribel Cruz, a thin, exhausted mother in her early 30s with tired eyes that had seen too many nights without sleep. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her clothes faded and worn, and her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from hunger and humiliation. She had not eaten properly in 2 days, saving every scrap for her children, Elian and Sophia, who waited with empty stomachs in a shelter several blocks away. That afternoon, desperation outweighed pride, and she walked toward the bright glass windows of Ridgeway Grill, a popular lunch stop buzzing with customers. Inside the restaurant, laughter floated through the open doors, mixing with the smell of grilled meat and fresh bread. Maribel stood just outside, rehearsing her request in her head, telling herself she would leave immediately if they said no. She was not asking for money, not asking for charity beyond leftovers, just food that would otherwise be thrown away. Something warm for her children before night fell again. The manager on duty, Curtis Halloway, noticed her through the glass. He was a large man with a permanent scowl, irritated by anything that disrupted his carefully controlled world. To him, Maribel was not a mother or a human being, she was a problem, a stain on the polished image of his restaurant. When she finally stepped closer and quietly explained her situation, keeping her eyes low and her voice soft, his patience snapped instantly. In front of customers and staff, Curtis stormed outside, his voice sharp and his face red with anger. He accused her of trying to steal, of scaring customers, of loitering. His words were cruel and loud, echoing across the parking lot. Maribel tried to explain again, her hands raised slightly in surrender, but shame wrapped around her throat and stole her breath. When she took a small step back, Curtis shoved her hard. The impact sent her stumbling to the ground, her palms scraping against the hot pavement. A gasp rippled through the few people nearby, but no one moved fast enough. Maribel felt the sting in her hands and knees, but worse than the pain was the familiar feeling of being invisible, of being treated as if her life and her children's lives had no value. She curled inward, fighting tears, apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. Curtis continued yelling, threatening to call the police, enjoying the power he held over someone so clearly vulnerable. He did not notice the sudden silence that began to spread across the parking lot, nor the way heads turned toward the road as a low, rolling thunder approached. The sound came first, deep, vibrating, unmistakable. One by one, motorcycles pulled into the lot, their chrome flashing in the sun. There were 12 of them, riders dressed in leather vests, helmets tucked under arms, patches stitched with symbols of brotherhood and long miles traveled together. They had been stopping for lunch, nothing more. But when they saw Maribel on the ground and Curtis towering over her, something ancient and unbreakable stirred among them. The group was known locally as the Iron Haven Riders, a mix of veterans, mechanics, fathers, and men who had once been lost themselves. Their leader, Garrick Boone, was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and eyes that carried both fire and calm. He took in the scene in seconds: the woman's scraped hands, the fear etched on her face, the manager's aggressive stance, and he knew exactly what kind of moment this was. The bikers dismounted slowly, deliberately, their boots hitting the pavement in unison. Conversations around them died instantly. Curtis turned, his confidence faltering as he realized he was no longer the biggest presence in the lot. Garrick helped Maribel to her feet gently, handing her a clean cloth from his saddlebag to press against her bleeding palm. No questions were asked at first. Respect came before curiosity. Maribel tried to explain between shallow breaths, embarrassment washing over her, but Garrick held up a hand, not to silence her, but to reassure her that she did not need to justify her existence. Behind him, the other riders formed a quiet line, their presence alone enough to shift the balance of power completely. Curtis attempted to defend himself, gesturing wildly, claiming policy and order, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. Customers had begun recording on their phones. Staff watched from the doorway, stunned. Garrick listened just long enough, then calmly reminded Curtis that there were laws, witnesses, and consequences, especially for a man who laid hands on someone who posed no threat. The police were called, this time not as a weapon against the powerless, but as protection. When officers arrived, the footage spoke louder than any excuse. Curtis's anger turned into panic as he realized the story would not end in his favor. He was escorted away, his job and reputation unraveling in real time. But the story did not end there. Not even close. Garrick and the Iron Haven riders did not leave Maribel standing alone once justice had begun its slow turn. They walked her inside the restaurant, where stunned staff members prepared meals, hot, generous portions packed carefully to go. Garrick paid for everything, leaving a tip large enough to make the cashier's hands tremble. Outside, one of the riders offered Maribel a bottle of water, another a small first aid kit. In the bright afternoon light, surrounded by strangers who suddenly felt like guardians, Maribel broke down. Years of swallowed pride, fear, and exhaustion poured out in silent tears. She thought of her children, of how close she had come to returning empty-handed again, and how this time, somehow, the world had chosen mercy. The bikers did more than feed her family that day. They drove her back to the shelter, making sure Elion and Sophia ate until they laughed again, their faces smeared with sauce and crumbs. Garrick spoke quietly with the shelter coordinator, arranging help, connections, and opportunities Maribel had never known how to access. One rider, Caleb Rourke, slipped her a folded piece of paper with a phone number and a simple promise that she was not alone anymore. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, Maribel stood watching the motorcycles pull away. For the first time in years, hope did not feel dangerous. It felt possible. Weeks later, the incident spread across social media, not as a spectacle of violence, but as a testament to accountability and compassion. Ridgeway Grill changed management, Curtis Halloway faced charges, and Maribel, with support and steady work arranged through community connections, began rebuilding her life piece by piece. She would often think back to that afternoon, the heat, the fear, the moment she hit the ground, and how the sound of engines became the sound of rescue. Not all heroes wore uniforms. Some arrived on two wheels, guided by a code older than fear. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that humanity can still show up when it matters most, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Your engagement helps keep stories of hope alive. And before you go, leave a comment below sharing where you're watching from or one act of kindness you've witnessed or experienced. It helps build a community rooted in compassion. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one choice, and a few brave souls to remind the world that dignity is not something anyone has the right to take away.